So our next speaker, we're really excited about this one because it's one of our own. We share a surname with similar spelling. And just last week he went all the way to India just to prove to me with a picture that his surname is spelled correctly and not mine. So our next speaker who's going to talk to us about the mind and financial psychology, Munaf Mukadam.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can start so long. I think for my first slide I do have a bit to say. So, yeah. So Jeremy I'm going to change things up here a bit. Jeremy has talked about the war that's happening out there in the world. I'll be talking about the war we often have with ourselves, about the financial decisions that we need to make. And I've been in the business for about 12 years now. And if there's one thing I've learned from the many conversations I've had with clients over the years, it's that the numbers alone do not guide financial decisions. If you think about Jeremy's presentation, it was informative, some great insights, a lot of clarity on what's happening in the world out there. But two people who hear the exact same presentation can go home and make very different financial decisions. So that's what I would like to explore in a bit more detail this evening. I'm going to pause there because I think, just in time. Great, thank you. I would like to begin with the question, which is, why do intelligent, educated people sometimes still make poor financial decisions? Because if we assume that financial decisions are based on the numbers, on the analysis, then we should expect consistently good financial outcomes, consistently good financial decisions. But that's not what we see. And the research suggests that the gap between good financial decisions and poor financial decisions, the gap is not intelligence, it's not education, it's something far deeper. Something beneath the surface. That took a while. So this evening I'd like to share some key insights on some research on behavioral finance. And the research introduces a concept called the money script. And it'll help explain what really drives financial decisions. So what is a money script? It's an unconscious belief about money. So it's our understanding of what money is, what it does, what it means about us as a person. It's formed in childhood and it's foundational. So by foundational, it means that it's our objective truth of how the world works. And because it's our objective truth, we don't think to question it, we don't scrutinize it. It's almost like an operating system that gets installed in childhood and just continues in the background for the rest of our life unless we go in and update it. So how is this operating system installed? Because we're not born with it. So how is it formed in childhood? Children are incredibly observant. They observe their parents, their caregivers, their communities, and they create a meaning from their observations. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Say a young girl, and she watches her parents screaming over bills. The young girl won't understand that, perhaps there's temporary cash flow issues at home. Perhaps interest rates have increased. Perhaps there's a war in the Middle East. Oil prices have shot up and now it's causing cash flow issues at home. She won't understand all of that. But by observing her parents screaming at each other over bills, she may form the belief that money is bad. It makes people do bad things. It breaks up a family. It causes arguments and problems at home. And she may internalize that idea that money is bad. It causes problems. The funny thing about these scripts is that it's also intergenerational. So it's hand-me-downs from generation to generation. So say, for example, a grandfather who lived through the Great Depression. He lost his financial portfolio, had to stand in bread queues to collect bread. He would naturally develop this deep scarcity mindset, which is understandable. But say he has a daughter. The daughter grows up watching her dad be very protective, cautious over his wealth. And even though the daughter may live in a completely different economic climate with a stable income, she may inherit those scripts growing up. Say the daughter has a son. The son watches his mom be very conservative and cautious. But the son observes that his mom is miserable. She's constantly stressing about costs. She has enough savings and funds to travel and make some purchases of nice things, but she's still very anxious about what if something happens and we lose our wealth. So she's constantly stressing, very cautious about her wealth. And the son grows up and he develops a script that's the complete opposite. So he wants to avoid saving, constantly purchasing things, trying to find happiness from his wealth as opposed to saving. So like in effect, the son's financial decisions are being influenced by his grandfather who lived 50 years ago in the Great Depression. But there's this generational echo of these scripts. And the interesting thing is that these scripts are not quirks about ourselves. They're not ideas that we remember. These scripts are actually wired into the emotional centers of our brain. This is a picture of a brain, obviously. And there are healthcare professionals in the room. So just a disclosure, this is the financial planner's very simplistic explanation of the brain. Just briefly, what's happening in the brain in terms of the money scripts. So we ideally want to make our decisions using the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that can problem solve, that can think about the long term and make a decision based on a long-term view. But the money script gets encoded into the emotional centers of the brain, largely comprising of the limbic system. And so, because money is such an emotional subject, often these scripts influence our decisions in the background. But even worse, when we're feeling under pressure, anxious, it could be work stress, it could be issues at home causing a bit of stress, it could be that the markets crash, and it causes us to feel a bit unsettled. During times of stress, the prefrontal cortex powers down and the amygdala takes over. And the amygdala does not base its decisions on spreadsheets and analysis. It bases its decisions on those primal associations that were formed in childhood, i.e. those money scripts. So this is a very simplistic example of what's happening in terms of the brain, but I'm going to go into explaining the adult behavior. We understand what a money script is, we understand how it's formed, we briefly understand the neuroscience of it, so let's take a look at the adult behavior, how it plays up in our lives practically. So the research has identified 4 common patterns. The avoidance, the worship, the status, and the vigilance. I'll go through each one, and then at the end, there are some practical steps that we can take. The first one is avoidance. These are the individuals that believe that money is bad. So they see their finances as a source of anxiety. They may believe that rich people are greedy or corrupt. They also tend to believe that focusing on accumulating wealth means that you have to exploit someone else. So they tend to sometimes ignore their financial planning. They may have a lack of clarity on their finances. They may see the share market as this engine of greed, and they end up sitting on piles of cash. Interestingly, the research found that that professionals or that individuals in the healthcare profession and the education profession, they scored the highest on the avoidance script. Which, if you think about it, does make sense, because if you've internalized the idea that money is bad and focusing on accumulating wealth is a bad thing, then pursuing a career that's focused on that isn't a noble pursuit. It feels like a betrayal to your core identity. So these individuals are drawn to careers that are more human-focused, more human-centered. And that is actually quite admirable. But where it crosses the line is that these individuals also neglect their financial planning. They may undercharge for their services. They may feel guilty about getting wealthy. And this is where money avoidance can become a negative. So it's not a lack of ability. It's more this internal resistance to engage in their finances, to engage in growing their wealth. If the money avoider pushes away wealth, the money worshipper is the one that clings onto it. So these are the individuals that believe that money is the singular key to happiness. If they had more wealth, if they could just get that one big break, all their problems would be solved, everything would be great in life. These are the individuals that put their career or their work ahead of everything else, because they're constantly chasing that one big deal, that bonus, that promotion that'll sort all their problems out. And you could argue that, isn't that practical ambition, because more wealth means a higher quality of your life, which is fair. But where these individuals cross the line now is that they believe that more wealth will give them this internal emotional fulfillment, which we know from the psychological data is not true, because to feel whole and to feel happy, you need a lot more than just wealth. You need good quality of relationships. You need a sense of purpose. You need exercise, good health. There's so much more. So these individuals, they constantly are making big purchases, chasing a neurochemical high to try and find that internal fulfillment, but they're unable to ever find it. And so they end up in this spiral, this cycle of delusion in some sense. So it's more about expecting your wealth to do a job it was never designed to do. The next one is similar to the money worship, but where the worship focuses on your internal fulfillment, the status script is all about external validation. So these individuals, they link their self-worth to their net worth. They are constantly comparing themselves to others, constantly wanting to appear like they belong in the upper echelons of society. And interestingly, the research found that individuals that grew up in a lower socioeconomic class, they scored higher on this script. And when I think back to the first half of my career, the first 5 or 6 years, I saw this clearly, because I found myself working with our young medical graduates. I was in Cape Town at the time, but I grew up in Umtata, and I grew up in a hospital housing complex. So I had a network there. And I found myself chatting with a lot of the medical graduates at Walter Sisulu University in Umtata. So these were individuals that had started their internship or they were about to start their work. And when discussing financial planning with them, they had very meaningful objectives and goals. For example, they wanted to build a home for their mom, or they wanted to support their siblings with education. And the majority of these individuals had grown up in a socioeconomic class, a lower socioeconomic class. But interestingly, alongside these very meaningful aspirations that they had, they also wanted to buy a luxury car, an Audi in particular. In that environment, the Audi wasn't just transport, it was this symbol of financial success. So they were happy. I think if I remember back then, the salary was like between 35 and 40 or something, but they were happy to put away 8,000-10,000 Rand a month towards a luxury car, which is 25%, which is crazy, to think about it. But the question isn't whether buying the Audi is the correct decision or not, because you could argue that they've worked really hard, they've passed their exams, they've just become a doctor. By all means, they can buy their car. The question isn't that. The takeaway here is that before making any big financial decision, pause and ask yourself, is this decision aligned with my long-term well-being, or is this decision aligned with how I want to be perceived? Because those two paths look very similar at the beginning, but over time, they end up with very different financial outcomes. The last script is the vigilant script. This is the grandfather that grew up in the Great Depression. This is the daughter that inherited his script. And I'll share a very common example, a situation that I've come up with discussing retirement planning with my retiree clients. And it's happened on a few occasions now. And since I've learned about this, I've started identifying the script. So in your retirement, you can invest your retirement capital in a living annuity. For those that are retired, you'll know what a living annuity is. But for those that are not, a living annuity is an annuity product that you use in your retirement. You invest your retirement capital in it and you draw monthly income. You're also allowed to change the income every year. And during the planning process, we'll do projections that account for annual income escalations as well, to keep up with the cost of goods and services. And so with some of these retiree clients that I chat with during the annual review process, when we start talking about income escalation, they'll tell me that we can keep the income the same, we don't need to increase it, they'll make do. And after asking a few more questions to understand why they're comfortable keeping the income the same, it becomes apparent that it isn't because the current income is more than sufficient for their needs. It's actually because they're concerned about their capital depleting during their lifetime. Now, this is a very simple example of the vigilant script, but this is the sad paradox of this script, that these individuals with this script are great at growing their wealth. They avoid debt, they're very focused on growing the balance sheet, focusing on the wealth creation, and they generally do a great job. But the sad part is that they struggle to enjoy their wealth. They struggle to enjoy they struggle to enjoy the life that their resources were supposed to provide them. So these are the four scripts. The natural question that you may be having is, well, if these scripts are so deeply ingrained in our mind, can we change them? Can we delete them? And the good news is that while these scripts are permanent, we can make changes. While these scripts are powerful, they're not permanent. They are not permanent. Let me emphasize that. So they're powerful, but they're not permanent. So what can we do? The first thing is awareness. We need to look inward, introspect, become aware of these scripts. It shifts the script from the unconscious mind to the subconscious mind. In the subconscious mind, you can then challenge the script. You can then scrutinize it. You can then understand it as well. If you think about a married couple, for example, imagine the one partner has a worship script, who has traits from the worship script. And imagine another partner has traits from the vigilant script. There's inevitably going to be conflict between the two. And if you don't understand your partner's script, well, then there's a lack of understanding. And I don't think any partner is in the wrong. They're just operating from a different place. So simply having the awareness of the script is already significant progress. Or if you think about a market crash as another example, often when the markets crash and you're feeling unsettled or you're feeling a bit stressed out, it's really the script that's being triggered. If you have the status script, it's your identity, because the status script individual, they measure their identity by their financial success. And so the status individual feels that their identity is being threatened. If you have a worship script, you feel like your happiness is being threatened. If you're a vigilant individual, you're thinking, I should have just kept my money in cash. Why did I invest? So the awareness can help tremendously, but updating it, eliminating these scripts takes a while. It borders on neuroplasticity now. So it requires constant effort, reflect, adjust, improve over time. But two things that you can do, two tools that help while we are trying to amend these scripts or trying to update them. The first one is a rules-based approach. So portfolio managers use this all the time. They have a rules-based approach to stop their biases interfering with their decision-making process when they're doing asset allocation of a portfolio. A rules-based approach is simply deciding in advance how you will deal with a certain situation before emotions come and do their thing. So for example, during a market crash, I'm not going to touch my portfolio for 7 days, or I won't ask questions for 7 days. Or if you find that you have trades from the worship script, then if you want to make a big purchase, you will wait 30 days before making the big purchase. But setting rules, having a rules-based approach allows you to make decisions on a potential future event before that event happens and before the emotions get triggered, which is where the prefrontal cortex powers down and the amygdala takes over. Secondly, accountability is very powerful. It allows two things. Accountability allows you firstly to have objectivity. So when you're in your script, it feels like the truth. But accountability allows you to hear someone else's perspective, get objectivity, get clarity to help you make your decisions. So don't make big financial decisions in isolation. Secondly, accountability also allows you to stick with an intended plan. So a simple example, if I tell myself I want to go to gym tomorrow afternoon, there's a good chance I'm going to cancel. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. But if I tell Wasim that we should have a gym session tomorrow, I'm now accountable to him. There's a much higher chance I'm going to end up at gym. So accountability is great in terms of giving you clarity and objectivity, but it also helps you keep up or keep to your intended plan. Ultimately, it's not about eliminating the script. That takes a while. It's about just preventing the script from making the decision. That's it for me. In closing, it's not about having the perfect portfolio or predicting what the markets will do next. It's about understanding yourself. And once you can see the script, you no longer have to act it out. Thank you.